Hello, welcome to Flavor Bytes. My name is Eric with the Vigo County Public Library. We are here in the West Branch kitchen to make no-knead bread. This easy recipe was first introduced by 𝕒𝕤𝕒𝕒 in the New York Times and requires no special machines, no work kneading, letting rise and kneading bread. All you do is mix the ingredients together, let it sit for 16-18 hours, shape it into a ball, let it rise, and then bake. We have 450 grams of all-purpose flour, and it needs to be weighed rather than measured out by volume. If you use a measuring cup, you'll get a different amount of flour depending on if you pack the cup tightly, if it's sifted or not, if it's more or less humid on a certain day. So it's really important to weigh your flour. We also have 360 grams of water, about 8 grams of salt, and about 1 gram or 1/4 teaspoon of instant yeast. It's okay to go ahead and use a teaspoon on this. We're first going to mix the dry ingredients into the bowl. Start with the 450 grams of flour. Next, add the 8 grams of salt and the 1 gram of yeast. Mix the dry ingredients together and then add the 460 grams of water. This is a very wet dough, and you can use a spoon to mix, but I prefer to mix with my hand because I can feel when any clumps need to be broken apart. You can feel really when it's nice and mixed and no dry ingredients left. The important thing to remember is we're not looking to knead the dough, we're just looking to bring all the ingredients together and leave no flour left in the bowl. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now we'll cover this with plastic wrap and let it sit for 16 to 18 hours until this has risen about doubled or tripled in size and air bubbles have formed on the top. After about 16 or 18 hours, your dough will have risen considerably and have nice air bubbles on the top. Next thing we need to do is prepare a floured towel to go into the bowl where we will put our dough ball to proof. So we'll take some flour and lightly sprinkle it on the towel, just to make sure the dough doesn't stick when you get ready to bring it out to bake. And then we will just put this in our bowl and wait for the next step. We're going to turn this dough out onto a floured countertop, just so that it doesn't stick. This is still a very wet dough and very sticky. And make sure your hands are dusted with flour as well. Now, gently pull the dough away from the side of the bowl and let it come out onto your floured countertop. It will deflate a little bit. Try not to knock too much of the air out of it. Keep your hands dusted, but try not to get flour on top of the dough. And then what we're going to do is bring the dough into the center and form a nice loose ball. If you have a dough scraper, this can help keep the dough off the countertop, but floured hands work just fine. So once you have it into a nice ball and gathered in the middle, you'll turn it over. What I like to do is kind of tuck in underneath with my fingers and form a nice skin on the outside of the dough. And once that's done, we will set it seam side down on the countertop. With some floured hands, turn the dough gently to form a ball. We're not looking for anything really tight or compact. We don't want to handle it too much. This is about all the work we're going to do in making this bread. So pick the dough ball up, put it seam side down into your floured towel in your bowl, and you'll cover it and you'll let this set for about 2 hours while it proves and rises. You're looking for it about double in size. When it comes to baking your bread, it's important to have a pot that has a lid that can withstand oven temperatures of 475 degrees, which is what we'll be baking our bread at today. The lid keeps the steam trapped in the pot so that the bread forms a nice crispy exterior. We're going to use a cast iron Dutch oven today. but you can use any pot that you have that withstands 475 in the oven, or a clay baking cloche, or a baking sheet turned upside down, or baking stone with a metal bowl on top. Whatever you have handy will work. After about 2 hours, your dough will double in size, and when you press lightly into the dough with your finger, the indentation will spring back slowly. We are now ready to bake. You'll want to remove your pot from the oven. Make sure you wear mitts because it will be very hot. And lightly flour the countertop and gently turn your dough out onto the countertop. Remove the towel. Be careful if it is stuck at all, just gently pull it away. And then with floured hands, get underneath the dough. It'll be very soft, and just plop it into your pot just like that. Now, cover it with a lid, put it back in the oven, and we're gonna bake for 30 minutes. While your bread is baking, you can take this time to make some fresh homemade butter. We will use 2 cups of heavy whipping cream and a hand mixer. You can use a stand mixer or food processor or an ordinary whisk if you would like. Make sure your cream is at room temperature and pour it into a bowl. And be careful when you're turning on your hand mixer because it could splatter everywhere. The cream will go through several stages before it becomes butter. As you whip the cream, it will start to thicken. Keep whipping through the various stages of whipped cream until you go past the stiff peak stage, where you would normally stop when whipping cream. The whipped cream will start to break apart and look lumpy. As you can see here, it will also start to turn yellow. Keep whipping until liquid starts to separate from the butter solids. As you continue to whip, more and more of the buttermilk will be separated. At this stage, you will probably have a lot of milk splatter outside of your bowl. Once your butter and milk have fully separated, we'll want to drain the milk off and make sure that all of the buttermilk is rinsed off of the butter. You can separate the butter and the milk by straining it through a colander or using a cheesecloth, or you can just gather up all of the pieces of butter in your hand, press them together, and squeeze out as much of the buttermilk as you can. Then we will rinse this in cold water to remove any extra milk. That milk is what will cause the butter to spoil quicker. I'm going to put this into a clean bowl. And we will rinse it with very cold water, squeezing, kneading, and pressing the butter to remove as much of the buttermilk as we can. We want to empty out the cloudy water and keep rinsing until the water runs clean. Once you've rinsed the butter a number of times and the water is clear, we're ready to dry the butter off. You can use a towel or paper towel or anything to pat the butter and try to absorb as much of the water and excess buttermilk that's left on the butter. And you'll want to put it in a nice clean bowl. You can eat this butter just as it is, or if you prefer salted butter, you can add, this is about 1/4 teaspoon of salt for the 2 cups of cream that we used here. Once you add this, you'll want to knead it, press it, make sure you get that butter mixed up really nice. Once your salt is thoroughly mixed in your butter, you're ready to go. Now the nice thing about homemade butter is you can add anything that you want. You can add any herbs from your garden or your spice cabinet. You can keep this in the freezer for quite a while. You can keep it in the refrigerator for about a week or so, or you keep it on the counter and go through it pretty quickly with your freshly baked no-knead bread. After 30 minutes, remove the lid from your pot and bake for another 20 to 30 minutes, depending on how dark you want your crust. After about 20 or 30 minutes, depending on how dark you want your bread crust to be, you'll want to remove it from the oven. And carefully tip it out and put it on a cooling rack or a cutting board until it's completely cool and ready to cut. Once your bread has cooled, you're ready to slice it and enjoy. For round loaves like these, I like to slice it right in half, and it helps to pick it up and cut on its side. And then you can turn the loaf on its side and cut it into individual slices. You can top this bread with anything you want, cooked vegetables from your garden, or homemade butter that you just made. I hope you enjoy your easy, no-knead bread and your homemade butter. Thank you for joining us on Flavor Bites. See you next time.